In Marvel Rivals, there's some incredibly powerful duos and synergies, but equally, there are some heroes that don't synergize at all and can actually create gaps and weaknesses in a team composition, making it almost impossible to win. That's why in this video, we're going to break down the worst duos in all of Marvel Rivals and give you targeted tips on building the best composition possible. But my question of the day is, what heroes do you want buffed and nerfed in Marvel Rivals? Let me know who and why in the comments down below. Make sure you smash the like, subscribe, and let's get into the video. Now, first off, synergy is not everything. While synergy is powerful and it feels good to have synergy, it doesn't mean that you're gonna auto lose without it. But without it, sometimes you do set yourself up for failure. Having an anti-synergy on your team can make it really hard to flow well, and natural synergy can often create games that are steamrolls and really easy stomps, but natural anti-synergy can make games feel really hard or impossible, and it just feels very frustrating. Now, the first type of duo that can set you up for failure is a lack of resources duo. So let's say a lack of mass heal. Mass heal is something that's really important when you have large HP totals that need to be healed up constantly. Let's say like a group, for instance, that is taking a lot of frontline damage. So a support combo like Loki and Adam would be really bad. You're going to be constantly utilizing resources just to keep the Groot alive in the neutral, and then you're not going to have your soul bond, your packs, your totems for when you actually need them in response to things. So your carry potential is going to be limited. You're going to have to play in a way that is not conducive to your highest impact, and you're going to have a hard time maintaining a neutral fight even without the enemy making any proactive plays. Now, there's also going to be some situations where you force a person to play in an undesirable way. So let's talk about Jeff for a second. At the highest levels, Jeff's actually reasonably good in the hands of someone that is aggressive with him. A lot of Jeff's value comes at the form of him playing aggressive, and in that sense, you ideally would want to play Jeff as a half DPS, half support. I know this is kind of weird, but let's not talk about it right now. I'll break it down in a different video. But if you are making your Jeff be a heal bot because your secondary support is like an Adam, and the Jeff is the only thing that can keep alive the front line, you're forcing the Jeff to play in a play style that is less effective than other people that could heal bot because they provide more utility in the neutral, and that Jeff is not able to access any of his utility if he's forced to heal bot, which predominantly it comes in the form of his survivability and the fact that he's basically impossible to flush out of locations. So what I mean by this is that you're forcing an undesirable playstyle on a person and making them play in a certain way just to fulfill the composition needs when it's not the way that they should be playing in order to get the max amount of value. Now, the other thing to consider is lack of capability. So there are certain capabilities of certain characters. So let's first talk about like healing flyers, right? I think Invisible Woman and Cloak can have some trouble healing flying characters. While they have some means to do it, it could be a little bit more difficult for them, or a lot more difficult than some other characters, and that could be something that creates uncomfortability in a team composition. On top of that, I think a big one that people run into is no one able to deal with Groot walls. So sometimes people can ignore Groot walls, and sometimes people cannot, and it typically has to do with mobility. Like, certain characters are going to get walled off, like a Magneto's going to get walled off, and he has to find a way around or break through the wall to get back. But some characters like Thor, for instance, they can just go over the wall. And I think that there's a lack of synergy there when some characters ignore it and some characters need to break it, and there's no one that can. Like, you need someone to break the wall because the supports are being cut off from the front line, but you have like a Magic and a Panther that are always in the back line, never able to break the walls. Now, this can feel really awkward, and you can lose fights for free because people are not either changing up their playstyle to accommodate for this awkwardness, or no one is playing a character that can deal with the wall. And once again, if you have a Magneto that knows if he gets walled off, no one's going to be able to break that wall, then he might have to play in a way that is undesirable and prevents his impact. Once again, similar to what we talked about before. Now, the next anti-synergy thing we got to talk about is characters that have separate game plans. So let's say Venom plus Bucky. I think a terrible duo composition. And the reason is because one wants to frontline and one wants to actively engage backlines. So Bucky wants to play at a frontline, he wants to play chokes, pull people in, and punish tanks and punish divers. Venom wants to actively dive in and go in himself. A Bucky that wants to play in with this Venom is going to put himself in unnecessary risk, and a Venom that wants to play with their Bucky would be way too passive to enact the normal game plan of Venom. They don't synergize particularly well, and they have completely separate game plans. Now, can you win with them? 100% you could still win with these two characters, but they're never gonna really play off each other that well outside of like Bucky ulting in. And there's gonna be a lot of value that the Venom gets, like baiting out certain cooldowns and getting people on the backline that the Bucky's not gonna be able to capitalize on at all. And the Bucky's gonna be hooking enemy tanks into his team without a tank to follow up on that person and deal damage to them. So that person is never going to be confirmed or killed. So these characters are just anti-synergistic, right? Now, you can still create synergy even outside of direct playstyle similarities. So what I would mean by this is a character like, I don't know, Squirrel Girl, for instance, might synergize actually with a Black Panther. Not because the Squirrel Girl's diving in, but because she's making the backline fragile for the Black Panther to make a play on. So that spam is actually something that the Black Panther can capitalize on. So just because the character isn't doing the exact same thing doesn't mean there's this anti-synergy. But going back to that Bucky example, he's a fairly short-range DPS trying to do damage in the mid to short range, and Venom typically wants to dive deep in the enemy backline, so there's not going to be a lot of overlap there comparatively. Now, the fifth worst anti-synergy is not enough damage. Now, I will say that this is really rare. A lot of people will say we don't have enough damage, and it's not actually true, but there are some cases where it actually is true. One of the games that I played recently was a triple support composition with 2 tanks and an Iron Fist. Now, while this can actually kill when we focus everything all at once, when 1 or 2 people died, all of a sudden we didn't have enough damage or raw damage to burst anything down or confirm any kills. We also didn't have an Adam Warlock or a Mantis, no support that could apply a lot of pressure, so it became really difficult for us to kill things even when we were winning a fight. We had 1 or 2 picks, but we couldn't close out the fight fast enough in time for our opponents to either regroup or build up ultimates that made the fight last a very long time. Sometimes you're playing a good composition on paper, but it's really hard for y'all to execute based on bad communication, or a composition that requires good communication in order to make it work. In addition to that, this is why sometimes you could die and you lose a fight when you feel like you did a lot. You got a lot of value. Maybe you killed 2 people and then died and you're like, oh, my team got the fight. But your life was so important to your team's overall kill potential and your ability to close out fights that once you died, it was very difficult for your team to actually win it. This is why even feeding in a fight where you did a lot might be the thing that cost your team the fight. And it's also important to note that you could have really great stats, but still be the reason that your team lost the fight. Now, some heroes are so strong that it doesn't matter. There are certain characters that are so powerful that they don't really need to create synergy because they can relatively hold their own. Like Doctor Strange, for example, providing a lot of pressure to enemy frontline, can peel for his supports, and has an extremely powerful ultimate plus a teleport. It's a character that's objectively strong enough that you will be fine playing him even if there's some amount of anti-synergy. Anti-synergy doesn't mean you auto-lose. Some characters can also change their playstyle to double down on an existing synergy. Like Magneto, for instance, can change up his playstyle in a lot of ways, like playing more neutral based against another composition that's similar, but against a composition that is being very aggressive diving. He can play more peel based, bubbling his allies, and with a composition that is more dive centric and mobility heavy, he can try to get value by bubbling his aggressors. Similarly, Thor can play a mixture of frontline and roam, or he can play more dive centric depending on who his pairing is. Characters can change up their playstyles to match synergies just as much as you can play characters to match synergies. Now, I'd say that while creating synergy with your team is important, creating synergy with your duo is most important. And I have a video going over the best synergies you should definitely watch if you want to create those. Now, sometimes playing the right synergies or the right comp is not enough. For example, a dive without proper timing, while you might be playing 2 characters that are both going to double down or overload the enemy cooldowns, it doesn't matter if y'all are never on the same page. Because the idea behind like a Black Panther and a Venom diving is that the enemy team don't have enough cooldowns to stop you, and they also will be overloaded because there's more threats than they can handle. But if your Venom is leaving as the Black Panther is approaching, or the Black Panther is going in before the Venom's there, and y'all are always cycling off each other and never with each other, you will create anti-synergy even though you're on the right composition that is supposed to double down on the same objective. Now, the other thing that can happen is anti-synergy based on the enemy team's playstyle. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to force your teammates into playing a playstyle that they don't want to be playing. And it's different to what we talked about before, because let's give you an example. Let's say that you are a support, right? And the enemy Black Panther is constantly jumping you and killing you. Every fight, they jump you, they kill you. They jump you, then kill you. And you also have a Black Panther and maybe a Magic. And those characters want to jump the enemy backline, cause chaos together, and maybe generate picks. But because you're constantly dying, even though they're doing stuff, you're losing fights, and they feel like they need to mark the targets that are diving you. They need to focus the divers. They need to shut those divers down, but that's not how they should be playing. That's not their highest value play style. And because you're not defending yourself, because you're making it easy for the enemy divers to kill you, you're almost forcing your teammates to adopt you and play a style that is not optimal. And I'm not saying that you don't always need help. If the entire enemy team is diving you, you definitely are gonna need help. But if one lone person is, and you're missing your skill-based cooldown, and you're making it really easy for the enemy to deal with you, you're putting a lot of pressure on the rest of your team because you're forcing them to accommodate to you. And if you can change up your pick or change up your play, not needing these things from your team, then you can create the synergy again, because you could actually create anti-synergy by encouraging your team to play in a different way around you. And this is true from every role. Maybe you're a DPS, making your support be out of position to heal you, or maybe you're a tank that's constantly being too aggressive, making your teammates push up, and they're subject to being dove instead of being someone that is defensive and trying to peel and survive a dive. There's all kinds of different scenarios here, but it's just important to understand that you can create bad synergy with your team just by playing poorly yourself or playing in a way that you shouldn't. So what is the tips to create a perfect composition 101? Number one, synergies. They're free value. We talk about them a lot. Synergies are super powerful, and I would recommend trying to add as many in your composition as you reasonably can. On top of that, combos. Certain things like Groot Moon Knight are very powerful and give you a easy win condition to burst through support ults and win team fights. And this includes things like being on the same game plan, like a Black Panther and a Venom, for instance. They combo well together even if they don't have an innate synergy. We talked about optimal versus necessary playstyle, allowing your teammates to create optimal playstyles instead of being forced into a necessary one, making it so that our team get to do what they want to do rather than what they have to do, like in the peeling diver example or the shark that is heal botting example. Even other examples like Adam Warlock being amazing in a triple support comp, mainly because he doesn't have the same pressures on him that he does in duo support, and he gets to be much more opened up to use his cooldowns for key moments, key plays, and it frees him up to play more optimal play styles instead of more necessary ones. Communication is also crazy important because creating a perfect composition doesn't matter if y'all are always not on the same page. So simple comms and communications about game plans pre-fight, very important, and prioritizing your duo or someone you're actively communicating with all the time is going to be the best thing you could do rather than thinking about the entire composition as a whole, but keeping both into account is also good. Last up is enemy composition or hero weakness. Understand that there are certain characters that don't interact well with each other, and there are certain favorable matchups. So as an example, you're up against a Bucky Namor with the Luna synergy and you're playing full dive. Your composition is directly countered by theirs, and that's something to think about before you consistently lose fights over and over again to it. Now, are there ways to overcome it? Yes, but it is important for you to think about how to overcome it and the fact that you have a weakness rather than being numb to it or completely ignoring it and just losing a fight without really knowing why. Anyways, I hope you learned something from this video, but definitely let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. Smash the like, subscribe. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.